The last time I was discussing Nintendo, I was discussing their anti-consumer end-user license agreement that they had put out right before the Switch 2 was set to launch. At the time, they got a lot of backlash for good reason because it's completely absurd that they reserve the right to brick your system for any reason that they deem unacceptable. And so far, there have been users getting their Switch 2s banned from Nintendo's online services for simply using a MIG-switch flash cart. Of course, it's disappointing to see Nintendo act so spiteful, but definitely not surprising. What might be more surprising is that used Switch 1 games are getting people banned as well in some cases, but that's worthy of a separate video. I have a feeling we're gonna have more about that coming out soon. But there was also a bit of a surprise challenge recently to Nintendo's new end-user license agreement from Brazil of all places. A public consumer watchdog group in Brazil known as Procon-SP filed a complaint against the recent changes Nintendo made. Basically, they argued that Nintendo being able to cut off the consumer from their services without justification violates consumer rights in the country. Now, most of the headlines about this story stop there and leave out some important details. The most overlooked detail is that Procon complained that they had to send this complaint to Nintendo of America in the first place because Nintendo lacks any official representation in Brazil. Nintendo of America then directed them to an attorney in Brazil that represents the company. The complaints also argue that if consumers were to have real issues related to the end-user license agreement, then it would be difficult to hold Nintendo accountable legally in the country. That's actually a great point considering that Nintendo has accidentally bricked systems in the past. At least in the US, you can reach out to Nintendo of America if you have a problem. Nintendo doesn't have a Nintendo of Brazil, so I could definitely see how this would be a problem. Now, it's important to discuss why Nintendo lacks a stronger presence in this market in the first place. Brazil is known for having some of the highest tariffs across the board, as well as high taxes, especially on electronics. In fact, Nintendo had already pulled out of this market back in 2015, citing these factors, but they did return to the market in 2020 with an official launch of the Nintendo Switch there. Because of the tariffs, if you really want to get your product into the Brazilian market, you have to manufacture there. Back in the day, Sega had to partner with Tectoy in order to get the Master System manufactured in Brazil, but it did make the system extremely popular because a lot of people could actually afford it since it was not getting hit with tariffs. Nintendo has never had anything manufactured there officially, leading to their systems being extremely expensive in that country. However, people did play pirated NES games in Brazil back in the day through a Famicom console known as the Dynavision, well before Nintendo released the NES officially in the market in 1993. Today, the Switch 2 is more expensive there than anywhere else in the world for that very reason, tariffs. Just going by the pre-order prices from late April, the price of a Switch 2 in Brazil came out to $788 US, which is absolutely insane. If you thought the prices were bad here in America, oh no, it's much worse in Brazil. But why am I mentioning all of this? Why does this all even matter? It matters because this complaint isn't really going anywhere. It makes for a good headline, but there's not much to it once you look into it further. This market is not a huge moneymaker for Nintendo and never has been. It's just a nice bonus in the grand scheme of things for the company. I admire Procon-SP for putting out this complaint, but Nintendo in this case does not need to do much of anything. They'll put out a simple statement sooner than later, and that'll probably be it. If Brazil goes after them any further, then Nintendo would probably just pull out of the market entirely over there. They've already done it before and Brazil has no leverage here, sadly. What we really need is a much bigger market pushing back against Nintendo. Our best hope would be the EU realistically. They tend to be a bit more pro-consumer than the US is. They were able to force Apple to adopt USB-C on iPhones and even allow for third-party apps on their devices, though the latter only happened for folks in the EU and not other regions. The Stop Killing Games petition has gotten over 1 million signatures there recently, and maybe that along with stuff like Switch 2's getting banned could get the EU to pay more attention to the video game industry and its garbage practices. We'll just have to wait and see. But anyways, don't get too excited just yet about what's going on in Brazil. There's a good chance that what's going on there doesn't amount to anything. Let me know what you think though in the comments below. If you're from Brazil, I'd love to hear from you about the tariffs. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.